no one who can give me safety certainly can't embrace me, because I want to start a fire and change the culture, which is, I think, is where music comes from, right? That Marilyn Manson quote I love. But if you want to change what's popular, you have to first become mainstream and then overcome the mainstream.
That's the never-ending battle in my head is, am I trying to change the culture, or am I just trying to say something?
Well,
Like,
those two are certainly not exclusive. I mean,
no,
you
they're not.
change the culture
Yeah.
by saying things.
No, but sometimes it's like what is the end goal here? Sometimes I literally just have something burning inside me that needs to come out. That's
Mm-hmm.
all. Sometimes that's all it is. But like, and I think when I was younger, I thought, well, maybe I'll get really lucky, and those things will end up changing the culture. But I feel like a lot more effort needs to go into changing culture if that's something you want to do. You have to become mainstream and then change the mainstream. Whew, that's one way to do it. Or there's only two ways to find that kind of success. You have to make stuff that people like, or you have to make stuff and get people to like what you make.
Yeah,
So those are the only two things. You have
that's
two options.
yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's two sides of the same coin. You know, I mean, there's I think the writer Wordsworth said that any new original writer has to create the taste by which he is relished, which I think is what I do with Twitter, right? It's like I go crazy on there, but then I also model the way for how to be interested in me. Essentially, what I'm doing is I'm being self interested in public and inviting anyone else to kind of like follow the thread, sort of knowing that everybody out there needs an escape from their own personality, just like I do, right? Just like I have picked my 150 people to follow closely and sort of be on this human journey with. I know that there are others who read me as well. And all I can do is let them in and let them know what it's like to be me, the real me, what I really am in the dead of night and in the anxious morning and in the boring, bored, scared, exhausted afternoon of having to decide once again if I'm a manager or an artist. Having to decide once again, should I be a business person or just kill that person and just go crazy all the time? All right. And it's like today is like any other day. And any day we reach will be like today. So when you ask about what the final goal is, it's just got to be to make today sustainable and to make it safe to be here so that we can believe in a year, so we can believe that the future will come, right? So we can make the notion of January 4th, 2021 matter.
Yeah. Hmm.
And I also noticed that I feel much better when I'm on air being recorded. So thank you. I feel like I
I'm
can
glad that makes
breathe.
you feel better. It is a strange thing, isn't it? When it starts to make you feel better. There was a time when being recorded gave me the what do they call it? The red light syndrome, where all of a sudden I'd choke up and I wouldn't know what to say. That actually still kind of happens a little bit, especially right when I hit the record button in my head, and like I will be the greatest host of everything all day long. And as soon as I hit that record button, I'm like, I just stutter and I
Mm-hmm.
don't know what to say. And it's the weirdest thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I think that, yeah, one of the nice things about having a recording device on your phone is that it's easy to forget that you're recording something. It just
Yeah.
becomes this transparent thing. And that's what I've
Mm-hmm.
noticed with a lot of the interviews that I do. I talk to a lot of people who, at the end of the recording, I'll hit stop and I'll say, "Don't worry, I'm not going to
Hmm.
share this recording with anybody." And they say, "Whoa, I forgot we were recording." Yeah, please don't share that. I mean, I'm talking to VCs
That's
that are
funny.
trashing other VCs and stuff. Um,
Well, yeah, and I mean, this is the game. I think certainly think that the poets play. I mean, what a poet does all day is they make the unconscious conscious, and it's a very violent thing because what it does is it sort of throws off the axis of real life, which is this distinction between public and private, and it sort of mixes them up, and it sort of debunks the myth of the distinction. It reveals public and private to be a false binary, and it's sort of like I'm going to hold your feet to the fire and say, no longer can you tell me on a supposedly unrecorded call that you hate this person, and then go back in public and resume your performance of saying nice things. I won't stand. I can't live in this world. I don't tolerate this reality that you are now forcing on me because we share a world. That's what's ultimately true about two people is we share one world. And I mean, I think it's a beautiful thing to have recorded someone who then says, don't release it. And it's like, well, now look who has the power. Look how powerless you are now. And it's like, you can sue me, sure. But I mean, how tedious is that? Right?
uh,
You really
yeah,
show other people how tedious the status games they play are. And you sort of force us both to make the world something else. And that's how you change the culture. You make it intolerable to stay the same and to keep playing. You flip the board over.
I think it'd be very rare if I ever published something that somebody told me not to publish. Only if I
Sure.
needed to be a journalist and there was something that I thought the world needed to know, and that might someday happen. But
Mm-hmm.
most of the time, I'm just having a conversation. I don't care to publish personal details or things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I know this about myself, but sometimes I need to be my own censor. I need to be able to be completely free to say anything I want, but I also need the freedom to go back and listen to myself and say,
Sure.
I didn't mean that, because I say things I don't mean all the time, and it's terrible. I wish I always said things exactly as I meant them. But how many things do I say a day where I have to go, actually I didn't mean that, or actually I don't even believe that? Oh man, man, if I could just say things that I believed all the time, if I could just say things that I meant. I don't know. Maybe there's actually some creativity to saying things that I don't mean. Maybe I come up with all kinds of wacky ideas because I don't actually mean them. How else would you come up with fiction?
Right. Yeah, fiction blows me away. Fiction is truly incredible. I don't know how they do it. I
Like
mean,
how somebody builds an entire world. Yeah,
yeah. And like what would drive someone to do that is also strange. And like how they can do that. How you like how do you detach from you just have to have a really small real life.
maybe. I when I
And that
was
you just like
younger,
disconnect from it so well and your mind is so
uh,
vast. But
when
yeah,
I was
that
younger, when I was younger, it was much easier for me to come up with a world in my head and elaborate on it to the nth degree to to make a character, an alternate version of myself or my friends. That was not a hard thing to do. As I get older, for some reason, I spend less time in that world. Maybe it's just because the real world becomes so much more real. But I have a harder time doing that. Luckily, I can still do it with music because music for me is like creating a fictional world. Um, Not in like, I mean, I guess I make music from a persona sometimes, but for me, making music is it's like being on a it's like purposefully stepping on another planet, or it's
mm-hmm.
it's like all of a sudden I am in make believe land and I can do anything. And that's one of
Mm.
the great things about making music in 2020 is you can actually do anything. You're not limited to the instrument in front of you or whatever. um, so like, yeah, I guess music is kind of like fiction unless you're trying to make something unless something specific, which I have to do a lot too.
I would say music is like nonfiction, but it's kind of scary because you see how much is possible between two people, right? You really get into a space where 1 plus 1 does equal 3, where when you're in the presence of someone else who is your equal, you see how much it emboldens and ennobles you to be more than you can be alone. And you sort of gain access to this shared consciousness because you sort of let go of your ego and you sort of close your eyes and get deep and go to the land of emotion. You know, this subterranean river of memory and associations that everybody has, right? You sort of tap in deep to, I mean, not only your heart and what your soul is and what your perception is, but you sort of go like deep into the centuries and you really go all the way to God. You really go all the way to the beginning and the end of the universe, and you sort of lose touch, right? Like I just brought myself there right now, and I'm there right now, and I'm formless without a body, and this is the place everyone longs to meet, right? This is the universal voice. There is no doubt about it at all. And then you take another deep breath, and you get back to form. Music is about form. It's about numbers in a sense. It's about feeling, and you get to do it with someone else. And it's like a very it's a very meaningful dance that's even more powerful than sex. It's more powerful than, I mean, it is war in a sense, but it's a holy war. It's a war for love, you could say. And it's like, how do we make this the thing that happens when we open our eyes? How do we make life like this? That's what music is. Is a conversation with someone else in which you both ask, why can't it be like this when we're not making music?
Oh man, so many bandmates that I couldn't stand for some reason. We played so well together. Um, I actually I hate hearing somebody say music is about form, but it's true. You need this form because the form is like the train that you get on, that you ride that train into the river basically, and then the river tears you apart. I think that you're right. It's a spiritual experience. And what I like about your analogy there, it's not an analogy, it's a spiritual experience. What I like about it is that a spiritual experience, when it comes to music, it's sustained. It's like having a conversation like this. You're sustained in that ether of spirituality. Like, sure, you can snap back every once in a while, but you're there. You're feeling it. You are in the zone, so to speak. I, I a question that comes to mind is how many times a day do you feel that? Because I was thinking once that, well, take this. So for instance, like, um, if you are in a room and somebody says something funny and everybody in the room laughs, that to me is like music because everybody is all of a sudden snapped into that ether, like they're sharing a spiritual experience, like one that is outside of any form or structure. It's it's like music. It's like when you're in a room with four other musicians and you're all playing together. And even if you're playing something that you all agreed to play in a certain way and you've done it a million times before, there's that place where you end up that you are sharing spirit.
Yes.
You are in another world. And I I think like what blows my mind is like how, and it's shared. It's shared. So you're doing it with another person. It's not just alone. And I think that's what's special about performing music with somebody else, or even watching a movie with somebody else, or whatever it is. Like whatever locks you in to that ether with another person.
Yeah. Hmm.
And music
In
is
the
just my way of doing it because it's probably because it's the most sustains for me. It's the thing that I can do for a long period of time, and I know it'll get me to that place very quickly and easily, rather than trying to write with a pen and paper might be harder, and that's something that's harder to do with another person, or having to or like exercising. That's something that can be very difficult for me because I'm always so aware of how tired I'm getting. And I wish I could just lose myself. Wish exercise was more of a spiritual experience for me.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, to me, exercise and music are kind of related, and it's kind of also related to thinking and writing and eventually speaking. I mean, exercise is a place where my attention mixes in an interesting way, and the inner life gets kind of sped up and slowed down a bit and like stretched out. If I'm on an exercise machine, it's a more mental experience of like doing either like listening to music, right, and like letting that music inhabit me, right. I told you I listened to the Mars Volta on the elliptical machine the other day. I did it, and I did it again this morning, right. And like, I mean, talk about form. Like, imagine listening to the Mars Volta and like their 5 or 6 albums in succession for an hour, day after day after day, the same time in the morning. How's that for having a good reader and a good listener of your work? You know, someone's going to spend an hour with you, you know, and I mean, and like one album is like you condense the genius of a year down into an album, you know,
Well, multiple years.
much like a vintner would condense from the vines she has tended for that year into the vintage of the wine that you get with the year on the bottle. It's like that's about as good as it gets as far as having a good listener.
Yeah, I think you're right. Having uh, somebody exercising to your music, that's a good listener. I used to be a DJ where I would buy records and then um, play them for audiences or on the radio. And I used to think that that was the ultimate listener, like somebody who is going to like almost share some ownership of what you've created and play it for somebody else. It's like
Ooh,
yeah, not or not ownership, but like all of a sudden, yeah,
that's
it is
so
ownership.
interesting.
It's like saying,
Love that.
I love this so much that it's part of me, and now I'm going to show you why. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like not only that, but when you're a DJ, and
Wow.
when you are, especially if you're an electronic DJ and you're like beat matching and you're doing, smooth transitions and stuff like that, you have to know every beat of the music. You have to be so familiar with it, and you need to be able to correct mistakes, and you need to be able to cue up certain parts of a record very quickly. So you have to know it, not just know the way it sounds, but the way it looks and everything. And I felt like there's if somebody ever did that with my music, I would be so flattered. Somebody knew
Mm.
where every little mistake was on the record. Like,
I think only your collaborators would do that. And what's interesting is that's inherently not experimental, and it's actually inherently um, maintenance, almost like janitorial, right? Almost like we know this highway very, very, very well, and rather than go do the next one, I'm going to be here to onboard you and to smooth out your on ramp for new people, right? That's when it becomes boring. Frankly, that's when it
collaborator.
becomes work. That's when it becomes a job.
Well, is a
Is
DJ a collaborator? If I am a music composer
they're a
and a
router.
DJ, DJ, they're a router.
A DJ
Someone
is a
buys my
router
record.
between someone's attention and a musician who has done something
Yeah,
and recorded
yeah.
something.
I mean, I've definitely worked with DJs before, doing remixes and things as collaborators. But hmm, that's interesting. It's an interesting thought. I hadn't really thought about it that way. But it is flattering when somebody knows every detail of your music. They'll never know it as well as I do, of course, but sometimes I can be that to myself. If I make
Hmm.
something, and maybe this happens in your writing too, but you make something and then 5, 10 years later, you go back and revisit it, and those little things sound new to you again.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Once you get some distance on it, all of a sudden the old seems doesn't seem new, but it reminds you how far you've come.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and again, it's I mean, for those who can go to that cosmic spiritual place, um, linear time is something that sort of keeps that spiritual journey on the tracks, and like you can kind of like you can anchor back to it, right? Like with form, with certainly like timestamps, right? And like how a thing like Twitter or Instagram kind of keeps the timeline structured, but ultimately that relies on real people who really give meaning to the dates and who have a sense of, well, what it mean, what does it mean that this thing happened on this date in 2017 and now it's 2021. It's like it sort of all depends on what someone else makes of the duration. So duration ends up being a very interesting um, subject.
For a lot of your work, it's basically continuous anyway, right? You've mentioned that, but that some of the stuff that you've written years ago is still in the process of being written. For me,
Yeah.
because of the way that I've published music and the way that I've released music, there's very little that I I don't publish anything. I was going to say I don't publish things that are unfinished, but that's not true. I think it's for me. It's like, well, one of the things that surprises me when I listen to my old work, the number one thing that surprises me is that it's so much better than I think it's going to be. Like I've heard people say that
Mm-hmm.
they're shocked how bad their early stuff is. Now they've come such a long way, but I think the opposite is for me. I listen to it, I'm like, this is actually way better than I thought it was at the time. It's like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and maybe that's my own confidence, my own lack of confidence. My entire life is never thinking what I was doing was good enough. Until later when I get some distance and then I go, man, if only I would have believed myself a little bit more, I could have done a lot more like this.
Yeah, you didn't have to be unreal the whole time. You could have just been yourself.
I know. And anybody can do that, actually. I think anybody can do that. I like to
Um,
think anybody can do that. I'm not sure if it's true.
I want to read something. Read an excerpt from a podcast episode that meant a lot to me, and I wrote out the transcript and I took a screenshot of my writing the transcript and sent it to the person speaking. I think it's going to play well here. Can I read it? It's not long.
Sure.
A 70-year-old student, a retired professor of literature, asks me if I know Wendell Berry's essay on poetry in marriage. I do not. The next day, a copy neatly stapled is waiting for me on the workshop table. Berry is interested in the troubles of duration in the forms of both poetry and marriage. Form serves us best when it works as an obstruction to baffle us and deflect our intended course. It may be that when we no longer know what to do, we have come to our real work, and that when we no longer know which way to go, we have begun our real journey. A mind that is not baffled is not employed. The impeded stream is the one that sings.
Hmm. So how does this fit in?
Well, linear time and going back to things you've loved before. I've often quoted the sculptor, no, painter. Let me see. I'm gonna Twitter search GP Lewis and the word rediscover. Auguste Rodin, sculptor, I like very much. It says, I invent nothing, I rediscover. And I've gotten advice from wise women before to not force it so much. Don't force so much. Stop working so hard. Just sense what is there. Sense it, right? It's almost like a call to get back to that spiritual place, get back to that deep place and listen, right? And this may be about being a musician even when you're not on stage, right? Where you're always listening for the collaborators. And in a sense, trees are collaborators. A bird that flew overhead that cast a shadow on the ground, I just noticed, is a collaborator.
Mm-hmm.
All right? Listening to all these things is a metaphor for what goes on, certainly on the computer. But the computer is just a visualization of what is true between people and communications that are going on, right? Human beings are still human beings, right? We know that they're social animals and that you can keep track of 150 others. And the best you can do is try to turn that into money. Because that's the way to be able to, right now, have housing, food, water, shelter. So we're a collaborative species, but we're also probably overeducated and don't know what to do with all the things that are possible. But yeah, that excerpt I read, when you don't know what to do, that's when the work begins. Because then you have to sort of learn all over again how to listen. And you have to remember all over again and sort of replace my mental model of you and who you are. Right? Because I've now lost myself in my own conversation, and I need to ask you to tell me what is real. Tell me what you are. Tell me what it is like being you and what's on your plate. And then I need to make room for you in my heart and mind and plans all over again. And it's like, well, that's almost like the music of real life is even when you're running a household or having friends, you're collaborators in music. And there is form and there is turn taking. And not everyone is the star, but also no one can be the one star. Everyone needs everybody else. I mean, even Freddie Mercury of Queen with so much star power, you still got to let the band do, each person do their thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's still got to come together in the end. It still needs a.
Well, it can. I mean, but like that's also maybe
group of individuals.
But even once the thing is supposedly finished, it then goes out to the audience, and then they get to do what they want, right? They can like and comment and annotate and take clippings and repost it with that, without our permission, and they will. So it's almost like the finished work is sort of a lie, or really, it's only one move in a series of moves that extends infinitely that actually destroys our notion of what a finished work is, and even the notion of finishing, right? I mean, I think I can quote Da Vinci. He said, no work of art is finished, it's only abandoned. Because who's to say what finished really means? That's really to say that I'm not the master. I'm not qualified to be an artist. I'm not qualified to touch the raw Picasso. I'm not qualified to ruin the integrity of it, when really art is meant to be given away, and it's meant to still be in process, and a testament to the holder of the art. And almost like trusting, it's like, well, do with this what you want. This notion of the original, I think it's got to go. I think we got to leave that in 2020, if not 5 or 10 or 15 years before that, or 100 years before that.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm going to have to wrap up this conversation. I know it's a short one, but got other things I got to do today. Any final words for this one? We can publish a short one.
Yeah, no, this is good. No, this is really good. I mean, Happy New Year. I'm happy with the 6 of these recordings that we have on YouTube right now, and this will be our 7th.
Mm-hmm.
I like the idea of doing 3 more and kind of calling that an album. No, I love working with you. I love talking to you. I mean, you know, I'm a musician, but you're even more of a musician, and you've been around much realer musicians than me, and so it's always really cool to kind of brush my edge of knowledge up against yours and to learn from you and kind of let some things seep over, much like a chemical reaction or what happens in a cell between the cell walls. There's some osmosis. I haven't said osmosis yet in the new year. I'm glad to bring that into lingual fruition. Lingual is not a word.
Osmosis.
Osmosis is good though.
Sharing between cell walls.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to hit
Yeah.
stop.
All right, man.